Welcome to the Document Strategy Podcast, where we talk to thought leaders, innovators, and subject matter experts to explore communication and information strategies that break new ground in business performance. I'm your host, Kevin Crane. Welcome to the show. If you are in the information technology business, it's likely that you know AIIM, the leading global community of information professionals focused on information and enterprise content management. With us today is John Mancini, president of AIIM. He's been with us before, and it's great to have him back once again. John's got a new ebook out called Information Chaos versus Information Opportunity. John, what do you mean by that?
Well, when I think about the opportunities that organizations have right now, many of them center around information. And everybody says we are a digital economy and digital businesses and digital executives, and that represents, I think, enormous opportunity for players large and small to be significant. The challenge, I think, is that at the same time that we hear about information opportunity and digital opportunity, I hear people coming to me and saying things like, my file shares are a mess, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing with SharePoint. I hear CEOs saying, why am I spending so much on IT? I hear IT people saying, golly, the business keeps running me every time I turn around. I don't know what's going on. And so, and I hear people saying things like information is leaking out of the organization at every juncture on devices that weren't even invented when I put my systems in place. And so, I add all that up, and that sounds an awful lot like chaos to me. And I think the challenge that people have is to figure out how you address those forces of chaos in such a way that you can capitalize on the opportunity that's there.
Well, we've got to take a quick break. I'm speaking with John Mancini, president of AIIM, the leading global community of information professionals. And we're discussing his new ebook, Information Chaos versus Information Opportunity, with 34 immediate actions to meet the business challenges of this century. And when we get back, I'm going to ask John to explore what those challenges are and what he says companies can do to meet those challenges that we face. So stick around. We'll be right back in 60 seconds. Since 1995, Crawford Technologies has been the driving force behind high-value, high-volume customer communications for many of the world's top organizations. Their ECM output management solution, Riptide, has been winning all kinds of awards this year. Riptide provides the ability to output content from different and varied ECM repositories and deliver those documents for output in print, fax, email, PDF, and more. Visit crawfordtech.com for more information. That's crawfordtech.com.
You're listening to the Document Strategy Podcast.
Welcome back. I'm with John Mancini. He's president of AIIM and the author of the new ebook, Information Chaos versus Information Opportunity. John, you say that the game has changed in business and that information, not money, is the world's new currency. As a result, organizations must manage information with as much strategic attention and focus and urgency as it now manages other important assets, its physical assets, human assets, and financial assets. Can you explain?
Yeah, I think when you think about where we have spent most of our effort over the course of the last 20 or 30 years with regard to enterprise technology, it really has focused on exactly what you said. It's focused on putting systems in place to manage our financial assets, putting things like ERP systems in to manage our physical assets, putting HR systems in to manage our people assets, and the one rogue elephant out there that, to the most degree, hasn't really been managed is the information assets themselves. And so that, I think, is the central challenge that people have moving forward.
And you talk about three major disruptors that are colliding simultaneously and as a result are transforming our world. What are those disruptors?
When you think about the challenges that people have, and there are a lot out there, the first disruptor I see as consumerization and everything that has happened in the consumer technology arena that essentially dramatically changes how we view applications, how we implement applications, how we deploy applications, how they work. And so that's the first revolutionary force, if you will. The second is cloud and mobile, and I usually put the two together. Sometimes people separate them apart. But I think the real richness of the revolution that they represent and the real richness of the disruption that they represent is how they interact with each other. And so what you have is this incredibly rich stew that changes the expectation of how and where people work, how they interact with systems, where information is located, how it's governed. All those questions become very, very complex because of the second disruptor. And then the third is more of a macroeconomic one, which is organizations in general, I think, are coming to the conclusion that they need to be flatter and more agile in order to address the pressures of the marketplace. And that's a disruptor because many organizations just don't look like that right now. And so, the issue that I think people have to deal with is that employee engagement and customer engagement really become the critical things that you have to focus on if you're going to be effective moving forward. And the technology infrastructure by which you allow people to do that, particularly when you deal with younger people, becomes incredibly important in that.
So it's all about the transformation of what users expect from applications and our expectations about access anywhere, anytime, and that combined with the need for organizations to kind of rethink how they perform in terms of their agileness. So it's really there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of chaos in there. I can see. So managing all of that, that's really the business challenge of the next decade.
Yeah, I think so. I have a little thing that I like to call Mancini's Law, which is basically, if I think of any organization, essentially organizations are basically systems of information networks is what they really are at their core. And they only operate effectively when there are clear and predictable information flows both within and between the networks. And what people are dealing with right now is that when you have a 50% annual increase in the volume of information being thrust into those networks, essentially it strains the connections, again, both within and between the networks. And I think if people are going to move in the direction of opportunity rather than, move in the direction of just like a massive traffic jam, ultimately, they've got to start thinking about the question of how information flows into and between those systems.
The volume and the complexity, certainly has increased, and that flow. There's also a lot of risk associated there. I mean, as we see with the data breaches at Target and Michaels, AOL, Neiman Marcus, these are all data breaches that have just happened in just recent months. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity, but there's a lot of chaos and risk there. How can companies really capitalize on the opportunity while protecting that risk side of the equation as well?
Yeah, I think the question of how you govern information, how you manage information, really becomes incredibly more important in the era that we're going into in terms of information security than maybe it once was. And what I mean by that is that in the old world, when devices were controlled, they were limited in number, they tended to occur, people used them within offices and things like that. You could manage and control information by controlling the device. So, we said things to people like, here's your cell phone. You can use it for work business and nothing but work business. Here's your and by the way, it had to be a BlackBerry. And then we handed people a Dell Latitude computer and said, here, this is what you can use, and this is only what you can use. And in that environment, you probably could do a pretty decent job of controlling information by controlling the device. But now I think what you have to do is start thinking, and this gets much more complicated, is that you have to start thinking about how you control the asset itself so that you can control it regardless of the device that it eventually winds up on. And that's a much different way of looking at the problem than the traditional way, which was focused either on media or focused on the device itself.
You mentioned the word govern. I really see govern as being sort of the new construct, at least for me, and not just in the sense of mitigating risk and those kinds of penalties or constraints on the legal or the risk side, but also governing it to do the things that are now needed to be effective in terms of customer engagement and company performance. And I like the way your ebook kind of outlined how the intersection of content and process has been changing. 10 or 20 years ago, it used to be something like this: capture, manage, store, deliver, and preserve. That's sort of a workflow or a life cycle that we're all very familiar with. But now this confluence or continuum is perhaps best described as capture, analyze, engage, automate, and govern. Is that what you're getting at? Can you explain?
Yeah, I think the challenge ultimately that we have is that we tended to view the governance piece of this in very narrow terms, usually associated with records management and usually associated with paper records management. And so I think where we're going now is that we've got to start thinking about this not only in terms of what we keep, but more particularly, we have to start thinking about this in terms of what we get rid of and how can we do that responsibly and effectively. And so, one of the concerns I have ultimately is that when you start thinking about the governance of information assets and the lack of an old-fashioned word, the stewardship of those assets, basically what we need to do is we need to get down the path of thinking about this in very simple terms, because sometimes all the terminology associated with governance and records management can be a challenge in terms of actually getting executives to move forward. So I like to think about it in terms of very simple things that I think even people like me can understand. Who can use this piece of information? What can they do with it? When can they do something with it? And where can they use it? And I think if we start thinking about those questions in a systematic way with regard to the information asset itself, then we'll start to move down the path of optimizing their utilization within the organization and protecting the organization at the same time.
It's time for another break. I'm speaking with John Mancini, and we're talking about his new ebook, Information Chaos versus Information Opportunity. If you'd like to get a copy of his new book, it's easy. Just go to our website at document-strategy.com/store, and you'll see it there. It's free from AIIM, and what a great price for such a valuable resource. So just go to document-strategy.com/store, get your free copy of John's new book, and stay with us. We'll be right back with this episode of the Document Strategy Podcast. I'm pleased to welcome Periscript as a sponsor of this episode. A lot of companies claim to be a leader or an innovator, but with Periscript, it's actually true. They're a leading innovator in handwritten and machine print recognition technology. Periscript allows you to digitally capture and extract critical business information from documents that would otherwise be locked on paper. And that includes not only machine printed words and data, but also handwritten information that is often lost or overlooked in the capture process. You can really boost your information governance with the ability to capture any data from any document from any source. Visit periscript.com. That's periscript.com.
You're listening to the Document Strategy Podcast.
Welcome back. I'm speaking with John Mancini, president of AIIM. If you're an information technology professional working with enterprise content management, you know AIIM. They're the leading global community of information professionals focused on enterprise content management. And John's new ebook, Information Chaos versus Information Opportunity, is available free from AIIM. Just get it at document-strategy.com and click and get it there for free. John, your book concludes with a list of 34 immediate actions that you suggest that organizations should take in order to meet the challenges we face. What are some of those actions and why are they important?
Well, let me give you some buckets, and that might be a way of thinking about this. And I think this is one of the things that we in the content management space haven't done as good a job at as we should, which is that, as we tended to talk about content management, we tend to talk about it in terms of what it is rather than the business problem that it helped solve. And so, one of the things that we're trying to do more aggressively on the part of AIIM is really think about those business problems. And we put them into four clusters, if you will. The first one is, how do organizations manage the risk of growing volumes of content and information? And so that drives them to address questions like, how do I set up a strategy for information governance? How do I automate things in ways that I don't automate them right now? How do I get at the question of controlling information in multiple devices? So the risk management question is the first cluster. Second one is, a process transformation one, which is, an area that's very well known to the AIIM crowd, which is, how do I use content and information to streamline and automate my business processes? How do I get rid of paper? If I have SharePoint in my organization, am I expecting that to be a business process platform, or am I expecting it to be something else? And how do I make those decisions? So transformation is the second one. Engagement, both on the customer side as well as the employee side, I think gets people thinking about questions like managing web content and mobile content, and what does collaboration mean? How can we get away from viewing collaboration as something we do on email, where we send around huge attachments to vast reply-all distribution lists? How do we really collaborate in the workplace? So engagement is the third cluster. And then the last one, which is kind of the newest one, is the combination of analytic technologies with semantic technologies and the accumulation of vast treasure troves of dark information that nobody knows what it is, I think create an opportunity to apply those technologies to all that dark data and extract business insight. And that, I think, represents something that has enormous opportunity, not only from the point of view of dealing with customers, but also from the point of view of automating some of the processes that have previously been manual. So risk, transformation, engagement, and insight, that's really where, that's the organizing principle, if you will, behind those 34 actions.
Well, those are three great content bucket areas. In other words, you need to protect your organization from the risk that information can present. You need to think about your processes and how information either fuels or hinders those processes, and how you work with customers and the company performance behind that engagement, and then just the wisdom and insight to improve over time and just optimize that performance. That's a lot. So how do I do it?
One first thing is to get your organization educated and understand that this is something that's a strategic issue for the organization. We provide an awful lot of training in that arena, across 6 major content management disciplines, and we would urge people to take a look at that. I think there's also an education in the broader context within the company and within the organization that needs to occur, and that's why we go about creating these crazy content assets like this ebook. There's also an infographic that goes along with it. There's also a SlideShare presentation that goes along with it, and the intention there is that these are community assets. They are designed for people to help work within their companies to build an awareness of the issues that need to be addressed, and to start going at them systematically. So those two things, I think, both the education of the practitioners themselves through really understanding the technology, as well as the broader market education that needs to occur, those are where we see the two primary areas that folks need to focus on.
It's time for a quick break. I'm with John Mancini, president of AIIM, the global community of information professionals focused on information and enterprise content management. When we get back, we'll talk some more. This episode is sponsored in part by Crawford Technologies, providing award-winning solutions for high-value, high-volume documents and information. They help support our efforts here, and they know what they're doing, so please check them out. Visit crawfordtech.com. That's Crawford, TECH.com. All right, then. And then with respect to the 34 immediate actions that we can take, what are one or two of the most important actions that you think we should be considering immediately with respect to risk, transformation, engagement, and insight?
I think when you start looking at risk, I think a couple of things that you need to look at is that, first of all, you have to look at it much more strategically than you've done in the past. We've done I think in some ways, all of us collectively have done a little bit of a disservice to organizations, because we've viewed this question of risk in very marginal terms. And what I mean by that is that, remember a while back, there were an awful lot of people that said, well, you have to view risk through the prism of ROI, but not the prism through return on investment, but the risk of incarceration. That kind of stuff, I don't think it really served us well in the long run. I think it tends, who would ever want to buy stuff against that prism. So, when you start looking at specific actions, I would look to the existing policies. I would make sure that you have an up-to-date information governance policy. I would start looking at, is it actually enforced? Because that's one issue that people have. I would look at the training aspect. That's something in our surveys we've identified as being a huge gap within organizations. And, a lot of other things that you could look at along the way, but I think most organizations need to start with the basics.
Well, there is a ton of risk there. I know I mentioned the Target breach. I mean, that's going to cost Target, just in the first month or the last quarter of the year when the breach happened, that was a $60 million hit. The estimate up to almost $1 billion, or certainly $500 million in actual direct costs. That's on top of the loss of sales and goodwill, and they're facing all kinds of lawsuits and so forth. So there's a ton of risk associated there. And you're absolutely correct. I think Target, despite having technologies and systems in place, had many of those gaps that you describe.
I think that when you think about the things that a C-level person in an organization cares about, ultimately they care about value, they care about cost, and they care about risk. And as I say, I think we've tended to focus on the least important elements of risk, that notion of personal risk, when I think what we should have been focused on is what you were saying, the business risk associated with having problems in your information management systems. And then I think when you start, climbing up the hierarchy, cost is obviously a place in which prudent management of information resources becomes incredibly important to mitigate costs, for example, related to e-discovery. The only way to mitigate those costs is by automating the systems and diminishing the number of things at the top of the funnel. And so information management and information governance is an incredibly important part of that cost equation. And then the last thing is on the value side. Ultimately, the ability to have processes that are transparent, processes that are responsive, processes that are engaging, rests on the information flow associated to and from the customer. And, you can't have that working in systems that are chaotic. And so I think for all of us in the industry, I think our challenge is to push that awareness up the ladder so that people start to realize that this isn't just a tactical concern that maybe a few IT people and records managers worry about. This is a strategic issue for the organization to get its arms around.
And one that could be the differentiator between being able to compete in the future or not. I mean, It's really all about, engaging with customers in new and more profitable ways and using information and the insight that we can get out of that information to do just that.
Yep, exactly.
I'm pleased to welcome Periscript as a sponsor of this episode. They are an innovator in handwritten and machine print recognition technology. Periscript allows you to digitally capture and extract critical business information from documents that would otherwise be locked on paper. You've got to check them out. Visit periscript.com. That's periscript.com.
You're listening to the Document Strategy Podcast.
Now, John, I know that folks can easily go to AIIM.org, that's AIIM.org, to contact you, learn more about the organization, and access a number of great resources. But what's going on for you and AIIM these days?
Oh, good question. Yeah, for folks that want to go specifically into the website, you can find the white paper at AIIM.org/infochaos. If you go to AIIM.org/research, you'll see the infographic. And again, no pride of ownership. You can use it in whatever way you want. We're just looking for the education mission. And if you go to SlideShare just look at my stuff, the J Mancini 77, you can find a bunch of presentations that you can use as well. At AIIM, I think we're focusing on 4 basic things in terms of trying to help the marketplace. The first is a market research function through a whole series of market research reports that we do that for the most part are free and, again, intended for education and benchmarking of the community that we represent. We try to provide expert advice to folks through our events and through our webinars. We just finished the AIIM conference a little bit ago, 3-4 weeks ago, had 650 attendees and 794 total people, counting the sponsor people, that spent 3 days basically looking at these issues associated with opportunity and chaos.
Yeah, we had a podcast report. Our last episode was a report from the show. Yes.
Yep. Yeah, it was terrific. The level of energy was so encouraging and so exciting, and I think it essentially reflects the fact that people are starting to wake up that these are important issues, and I hope we're able to help them address them. And, the third cluster of things we do is skills development, and do that through a variety of training programs. And then last, we take this role of being the community. We do standards development through this community. We do local events through our chapters. We have an expert blogger network that tries to raise issues with the community. So, you think about that. That's really our focus is market research, skills development, expert advice, and community development.
John Mancini, I really want to thank you for returning to the podcast. This is your third time as a guest. I hope that you'll come back again real soon.
Anytime, Kevin. Always love being on the show.
That's John Mancini. Get his new ebook, Information Chaos versus Information Opportunity, at our author's store at document-strategy.com/store. And if you like what we do here at the show, you should subscribe. That way you'll never miss an episode. Like our next episode next month with author Joel Gurin, who will be here talking with us about open data. That's different than big data, and we'll find out more next time. So subscribe to the show on iTunes at document-strategy.com/iTunes, or just visit document-strategy and you'll see the links to iTunes as well as Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio. It's all there. It's easy. And we'd love to have you be a part of our growing community of listeners around the world. With that said, that'll do it for this episode of the Document Strategy Podcast. Join me next time when we continue to explore communication and information strategies that break new ground in business performance. I'm your host, Kevin Crane. Thanks for listening. The Document Strategy Podcast was produced by Crane Communications Group. Visit cranegroup.com. That's CRAINE, cranegroup.com.